Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, the direct route to PMP exam success. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, where we discuss all PMI-isms you need to understand before taking the PMP exam. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. Project communications is not a fire and forget type of process. It is much more involved than that. Tracking, monitoring, orchestrating is required to ensure that project communications run as expected. This lesson here is about control communications, where we look at the processes that enable you as the project manager to control the information flow to the stakeholders. Here are the areas of control communications that we are going to be examining in this lesson. The relevance of this process, which could be characterized as the information gatekeeper for the entire project lifecycle. We explore how the control communications process ensures optimal information flow among all communication participants. This includes ensuring stakeholder information needs are met throughout the entire project lifecycle. In controlling communications, you need to compare how actual communications are carried out versus how they were planned to be, as reflected in your communications plan, standards, as well as expectations. And you use different tools and techniques to generate various possible outputs, such as work performance information, change requests, and other updates. And if I tell you that we had to split this lesson up into two parts, you can probably already tell what the content of those two parts are. Yes, exactly. Part 1, overview and inputs. Part 2, tools, techniques, outputs, and a review. The project communications management knowledge area includes the processes that are required to ensure timely and appropriate planning, collection, creation, distribution, storage, retrieval, management, control, monitoring, and the ultimate disposition of project information. But interesting enough, to help us with all of that, we have just 3 processes. They are, first of all, plan communications management, the process of developing an appropriate approach and plan for project communications based on stakeholder information needs and requirements and available organizational assets. From here we move on to manage communications. This is the process of creating, collecting, distributing, storing, retrieving, and the ultimate disposition of project information in accordance with the communications management plan that we developed in the first process there. And lastly, control communications, the process of monitoring and controlling communications throughout the entire project lifecycle to ensure that the information needs of the project stakeholders are met. In regards to the process groups that these 3 processes fall into, it's quite straightforward. Plan communications management is a planning process. Manage communications is an executing process, and the focus of our lesson right now, control communications, is part of the monitoring and controlling process group. The main concept to understand in this process is that control communications serves as the information gatekeeper for the entire project lifecycle. It's really all about how we monitor and control communications for the project. You want to meet the information needs of your project stakeholders, and you want to ensure optimal information flow to the stakeholders. So, in other words, control communications revolves around making sure that stakeholders get the information in the format they need and when they need it. Another important aspect of communications management is its iterative nature. For example, you may find that under the control communications process that there are issues and specific situations which will cause you to revisit the plan communications management or the manage communications process. Perhaps there is a miscommunication, perhaps an unexpected risk event has occurred that will warrant an iteration through communications management. This is to be expected because it is the nature of project communications management. It is in flux and you have to adapt. Depending on the severity of these issues or other surrounding factors or implications, these triggers may cause immediate action or may allow you the luxury of time before taking some future action. What is key here is that you ensure that a timely and appropriate message is sent to the right audience. In regards to the inputs, tools, techniques and outputs, we see here on figure 10-7 from the PMBOK guide, we have 5 inputs, 3 tools and techniques and 5 outputs. And as was the case with most previous lessons, we're going to spend a little bit more time examining those areas which we believe might receive more attention on the PMP exam. For instance, expert judgment on the tools and techniques. We'll see why it is more of an art than a science. Or under outputs, we will see which change requests apply to this process. Also, let me reiterate how important it is to understand the concept behind a process and why a particular input, tool, technique or output is used, rather than just simply memorizing the list of which ones are inputs, tools, techniques and outputs. Well, let's now move on to the inputs. So we have 5 inputs to this process, and let's take a look at where these actually come from, which processes hand them off to us. The project management plan is our first input. It is an output of the develop project management plan process, which falls under project integration management. Project communications is an output of the manage communications process, which, just like control communications here, is part of project communications management. The issue log is the output from the manage stakeholder engagement process, which is one of the processes under the project stakeholder management knowledge area. Work performance data is an output from direct and manage project work in the project integration management knowledge area. And last but not least, organizational process assets, the OPAs, are informational artifacts unique to and used by the organization as a whole to guide and run your projects. They do not come to us from another process, they come to us from our organization. So, since all these inputs have been addressed really in other knowledge areas, including communications management, we'll only touch upon them briefly in the upcoming slides. There are 3 main types of information that we want to take out of the project management plan as we get into this process here. First of all, stakeholder communication requirements. How do the stakeholders want to receive information? By email, by meetings, in person? What were their requirements? Then we also need to look at the reason for distribution of information, to provide resource updates, to provide under and over budget information, to provide milestones and deadline information, and so on. And lastly, the time frame and frequency for the distribution of required information is also documented in the project management plan. Should it cover a day, a week, or a month? And how frequently must it be distributed? For example, should it be a daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly status report when the information is being requested? As you can see, this information that we take out of the project management plan is basic. It's very basic, but it's very important to effective and accurate communications. Failure to know about this can result in misinformation and misdirection. Project communications are the result of the managed communications process. They are an output over there, and we use them as an input here. They could be things like deliverable status, schedule progress, or cost that was incurred on our project. And of course, the communications, they come from multiple sources. The formats may vary in detail and in confidentiality, yet we need to have this as an input here to this process to make sure that we can control our communications, that the information provided in this was correct and in the correct format. So the issue log is an output from the Manage Stakeholder Engagement knowledge area. The issue log is like a warning sign that you encounter while driving. It warns you to be prepared for what's ahead. It's up to you to pay attention to the information. This resource is a vital input to the control communications process. It's a storehouse of information about what has happened in the project. It's a placeholder for future concerns and actions affecting the project. As part of issue resolution, the issue log may specify additional communication which needs to be delivered at a later date. Work performance data can take the form of feedback from stakeholders on communication or results from surveys on communication effectiveness. The first thing that is done in the control communications process is to gather all kinds of information about how well the project has been performing its communications. Well, actually, that's not 100% correct, because gathering this data is not really part of this process. We do that elsewhere. For instance, work performance data are the output of the direct and manage work process in project integration management. In addition, work performance information is an output from project scope management, project time management, and project cost management. So we get this information from over there. We see later on, when we go through the outputs, of how the work performance data is then organized and summarized as work performance information. Different organizational process assets may impact the control communications process, and here are some examples of these influential assets. Reporting templates provide consistency in how you deliver information to your stakeholders. Communication media. Your organization may specify which ones you are allowed to use and under which circumstances they are appropriate to use. Record retention policies. They detail how long you have to retain information and when you should dispose of it. And lastly, security requirements. You have to follow overall organizational security policies on communication. You may be leading a key project where security is imperative to maintaining your organization's competitive advantage. This applies to all steps of the communications chain, all the way to disposal. Overall, you need to be aware of and understand your organizational process assets so you can properly control communications. And with that, we have reached the end of part 1 of this lesson. Justine?
So long.
Until next time.